Alright guys, my name is Captain Hubbard from Hubbard's Marina. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about nearshore and offshore fishing, and a little bit about Hubbard's Marina and what we do, and hopefully we'll be giving you some fishing tips and tricks you may not have known about, or might be doing something a little different. I'd like to talk with you, not at you, so if you have any questions, comments, concerns, don't hesitate to raise your hand. No stupid questions. In my opinion, it's just stupid not to ask them, that's all. Alright guys, so just let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns. If I'm talking about something, you want to know a little bit more about it, you want me to go into more detail, if I say a term you don't know, don't hesitate to let me know. Hubbard's Marina, we're right over the bridge in Johns Pass Madeira Beach. We do 5-hour, 10-hour, 12-hour, 39, 44, and 63-hour party boat fishing trips. Anything from about 2 inches of water out to about 1,000 foot of water. We can do anything you want. We can catch anything in the Gulf. We can attempt to catch anything in the Gulf. And we'd be more than happy to set you up a private charter, or you can hop on some of the party boat trips. Everybody should have a brochure around their chair. If you didn't get a brochure, I can hand you one at the end. The brochure has a website on it. Highly recommend checking it out. We have a lot, even if you fish your own boats. Look at the website. I try to make it a helpful tool. If you go to the info section, there's weather links. There's a fishing regulations section that keeps you up to date on the federal fishery regulations. And there's a fishing tips section. So thanks to the guys here filming the seminar, these seminars get cataloged on the website. So you can always go to hubbardsmarina.com, find out about more information, and hopefully pick up some more tips and tricks. So today, we're going to be mainly talking about nearshore and offshore fishing, what's going on right now. Right now, it's a great time of year to catch gag grouper. Gag grouper, they close December 31st, so we don't have too much time left to get them. But once they close at the end of December, they will not reopen until June, hopefully June 1st. That's what we're thinking, and that's what it looks good for right now. So, that's going to be 6 months without them, so it's a good time of year to go capitalize on the great bite. Right now, they're as shallow as in the bay. People are catching them on the Skyway, even as far as like middle Tampa Bay. I've been seeing some nice gags caught. So there's plenty of gag grouper inshore, right on the beach, and way offshore as well. We primarily specialize in nearshore and offshore fishing, but we work with some really top-notch inshore guys. If you do want to get out in an inshore charter, we can get you set up with that too. Guys like Capt from the Real Animals, they do a great job. But offshore, the gag grouper bite is really funky right now. It's either in the bay, on the beach, or out to about 50, 60, 70 foot. Once you get past 70 foot right now, the gags seem to kind of disappear until you get out to about 120, 130 foot. So there's a big gap in the middle there that seems to not be so heavy with the gag grouper. The red grouper, you're still finding them here and there throughout that water. The hogfish bite's going okay right now. You're still catching a good amount of them. It's still fairly consistent, but not the huge numbers. The big push to the hogfish will start sometime in December, and they'll continue until around early to mid-April. Hogfish like that cooler water, so it needs a little bit more time for that water to cool down a little bit more. Once that water cools, the hogfish go out there to spawn. So, gag grouper, hogfish, another thing going on right now is cobia. There's a lot of cobia in the nearshore waters. Just the other day we caught about a 45-pounder on a flying Hub 2 charter, catching quite a few cobia on the hub. The party boat, a little bit more difficult to sight cast those cobia, but we're still catching some nice ones. Triple tail, a lot of triple tail out right now. Anybody familiar with triple tail? Or how about this, anybody not familiar with triple tail? Okay, triple tail, what they are they're a funky looking fish. They look a little bit like a dinosaur, but they're some of the best eating fish around. Triple tail like hanging on flotsam or debris floating in the water. For example, crab buoys, floating grass, stuff like that is going to hold small bait shrimp, and that will attract those triple tail in. If you don't mind, man, if you were hanging out for the seminar, come grab a ticket real quick. You're going to be the last lucky guy to get a ticket. No worries. All right. So the triple tail, they hang around these things, and what you'll do is as you're passing those buoys or floating debris this time of year, just look over. A lot of times you'll see that black shadow underneath there, and it's really cool because a lot of times you can pass them, slow your boat down, do a circle back, and then you have a chance to present baits to them. So we'll talk a little bit about those. Pelagic gags, triple tail. Still, the red grouper bite's fairly steady throughout the day. Right now, the gag grouper is mainly at sunrise. You gotta wake up early. Early bird does get worm right now. The gag grouper bite at sunrise is very good. Are there other species that you guys want to talk about today? No?
Trout?
Trout. Near shore and offshore up there, Robert. Just kidding. Trout is great right now too. When the water cools down, big gator trout come in the area, and trout will move into the back bays, the areas where they haven't been during the spring and summer. Water gets really hot in those shallow water areas, and those trout will tend to move into deeper water to stay warmer or stay cooler, and they spread out. This time of year, water gets cooler. The trout will go into those shallow water areas, and it's a little bit easier to target big pockets of trout. And trout are one of those funny things, when you catch one, there's going to be a lot more too. So trout are pretty cool in that respect. Plus, there's a lot of big gator trout out right now, so it's a great time of year to target trout. But in all honesty, I'm not going to go too much into trout. I make myself look stupid. Alright, so let's get into a little bit about tackle. I like starting each seminar talking about the tackle I recommend, tackle choices I like doing, and why. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the toys I brought over here. One of my favorite that I always start talking about is my 2-speed reel. Nowadays, in this day and age of technology, 2-speed technology for bottom fishing is really developed to a point where it's becoming more and more affordable. A few years ago, to get a 2-speed reel, just for an intro basic 2-speed reel, it'd be $300, $400, $500. Nowadays, you can get a nice 2-speed reel of good quality anywhere from $250 to $350. So that's quite a price drop. It's still a pricey reel, but keep in mind, it's like you're using 2 reels as one. On a 10-hour all day, on a 5-hour half day, and any type of near-shore trip from 10 to 25, 30 miles, I would fish with this reel 90% of the time, if not the whole time, because of that ability. So the great part about having a 2-speed reel, again, is like having 2 reels in one. What I mean by that is with the ability to change speeds, you have a high gear ratio reel and a low gear ratio reel of 1. Now, the gear ratios, if you have the higher gear ratios, it's great for catching snapper, it's great for setting the hook quickly, it makes it really easy to set the hook and make sure you're not missing fish. But the higher the gear ratio, the lower the power. The lower the gear ratio, the higher the power, but the slower the retreat. So I'll show you real easily. See where the lead is? We're in high speed right now. I'm going to turn the handle 1 revolution. So turn the handle 1 revolution. Almost couldn't do it. It pulled up so much line. So we'll start that again. See where the lead is? We're going to put it in low gear. Just press some buttons, all it takes. Now we're in low gear, 1 revolution. Didn't move very much, did it? That's the difference. The high gear will retrieve much more line, much more quickly, but you don't have as much power. Let me show you that. Sir, you want to hold on to that lead for me? Hold on nice and tight, okay? So, I'm in high gear mode, and typically when I'm fishing, I have my drag, my lever drag set to the strike mode. In the strike mode, typically I'm using this reel for mangrove snapper or red grouper. So my strike drag is set to where I can still pull some drag out fairly easily. Because I'm fishing for mangroves and those other fish where I don't need to lock down my drag. So I've got my drag set for mangroves. I'm in high gear mode for the mangrove snapper. I start reeling and I'm taking in a bunch of line, but I start reeling. How many times have you guys been fishing for mangroves? You start cranking down and all of a sudden your rod bends way over and you're like, uh-oh, this isn't a mangrove. Yeah, that happened to you? Well, with the 2-speed reel, I can't really gain much. Pull back on. There you go. Pull back, right? So with the 2-speed reel, I don't have much power. I can't, or in high gear mode, I don't have much power. I can't really do much. But all I do is with the press of a button and moving that lever, which doesn't take very much time, hold on tight, I can crank this guy's reel right to me. So it's a lot, or crank that fish right to you. You have a lot more power. It's very, you notice that when you were holding it, how much more power I had that second time? Yeah, it's a lot more strength. When you switch to a lower gear, you have a lot more power, and all it takes is the press of a button. Thank you. So that's why I like the 2-speed reel. Just because you're able to fish with a high gear mode and be targeting those mangrove snapper with a quick press of a button and drag adjustment, all of a sudden it's like I switch to, now I'm holding one of these reels. So it's like you're fishing with both of these rods in one reel. Because you have the high gear, or you have the high gear ratio, you're retrieving a lot of line very quickly, but with the press of a button, now I've got a lot of drag, I'm going a lot slower, I've got a lot more power. So that's why I like the 2-speed reel, because it gives you that ability to multitask. Because when you're fishing out there for mangrove snapper, you've got the mangrove snapper chunked up, and they're biting like really well. A lot of times you're going to catch gag grouper mixed in, right? And it's very disheartening when you start fishing for mangroves, there's mangroves biting everywhere, and all of a sudden you get a big fish on your little tiny sardine plug. You break off, and now you got to turn around and rig back up while everybody else is catching fish around you. So that's why I like the 2-speed setup. Any questions? All right. Also, along the same lines of the 2-speed setup, it's just a high gear ratio reel. If you don't have the change to go out there and get a 2-speed reel, you can get a high gear ratio reel for snapper. For many, many years, all I used was just a simple lever drag reel with a high gear ratio. This is a high gear ratio, I should probably spell that out. A high gear ratio is like 5 to 2, 6 to 2, 7 to 1, somewhere in there. So like 6.2 to 1 is pretty average for high gear ratio. 7 to 1 is a really high gear ratio. I like sticking around 6 to 1. It's realistic. You're bringing in a ton of line, but you still have enough power to handle a decent red grouper or a large mangrove. If you start getting into like the 7 to 1, 8 to 1, it's too fast. You just don't have enough power to handle any type of larger fish, in my opinion. Everybody has their own opinion. But a single speed reel for the snapper and a high gear ratio works really, really well. This setup, this is an offshore angler, Ocean Master lever drag reel paired with a really sensitive light jigging rod. So this setup is very, very light compared to the 2-speed setup or the 6/0 setup. So it works really well for jigging, works really well for snapper, and if I know I'm fishing up off the bottom, when I've got those mangroves chunked up, then I can use one of these because I'm not having to worry about the option of switching to low gear. And it works well because I can jig it much more easily. Also works well for flatlining too. The next level up would be my 6/0 reel. 6/0s have a nice medium gear ratio. Medium gear ratio is 3 to 1, 4 to 1, somewhere in there. So this is a 3 to 1 gear ratio, plenty of drag capacity. Typically with my 6/0s, I'm using 60 to 80 pound test. And depending on what I'm targeting, I vary my leader size. So that's the other option. Then I bring the big rod, the 9/0. 9/0, typically I'm using 100, 125 pound test, and typically the leader is about the same size depending on what I'm fishing for. So those are kind of my 3 main conventional setups, my 2-speed, my 6/0, my 9/0, and then I'll have a few high-speed jigging rods for my flat lines or for jigging. And then last, but not least, is the spinning rod. Spinning rods offshore, personally, I do not use the spinning rod offshore to bottom fish. And I strongly defend that. Even though nowadays the spinning rod technology has just made leaps and bounds. So you can buy these 6,500, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000. They make like a 14,000 now. I think they have one, I saw at ICAST that had like 80 pounds of drag, which no human could hold. Especially with one hand, with how you hold the spinning rod, it would just be too difficult. So they do make spinning rods that you could probably get away with using when you're bottom fishing offshore. But the main reason I don't like spinning rods offshore is just simply how they're made, or how they're positioned. So to use a spinning rod, when you catch a fish, you have to be holding the reel like this. Reel's down, and you're holding it with one arm, your arm's off to your side. It just doesn't give you a lot of power. And if you get a big fish and it starts pulling you down, you don't really have any options. Whereas with my conventional rods, when I get a big fish on, the back of the rod's underneath my arm, my left hand's out in front, my elbow is right in my gut. So if I get a big fish on, I can handle it. And if he really starts to school me, I can drop the foam of my rod right onto the rail, and my reel still being able to use. The spinning rod, you can't do that. You don't have that option. Whereas if I'm getting schooled, I set it right down on the rail, and sometimes you even come down to a knee, and you can rock the fish right on the rail, using the rail as a fulcrum to help you fight that fish. Sometimes it might get made fun of, but to catch a big fish, you gotta do it sometimes. So that is why I prefer conventional rods when I'm offshore fishing for big grouper, amberjack, stuff like that. I prefer bigger conventional rods for that reason. But spinning rods have their place offshore. Most of the time what I'm using a spinning rod for offshore is what I have it set up for right now. This is called a knocker rig. A knocker rig is simply an egg sinker on your main line that is not obstructed. It's able to travel all the way up and down your main line. There's no swivel, there's no line-to-line knot to stop it. I use a really long fluorocarbon leader. I've got about 20 to 25 foot of fluorocarbon on here. So my line-to-line knot is about 25 feet from that hook. That way that egg sinker can travel a long distance away from my bait. The further that egg sinker travels from the bait, the slower the bait's going to descend, and the more natural it's going to appear. So the idea behind a knocker rig is to allow that bait to go back into your chum line and appear more natural. Because when you're out there bottom fishing, especially on a party boat or when you're with a few buddies and a good bite of fish, you're going to get a lot of other fish attracted into that chum line. So you'll have pelagic fish, you'll have other snapper, you'll have other species from other areas coming up that chum line and feeding on that chum. So you might anchor up over a spot, start catching fish. The fish on that spot, some of them might come up off the bottom. So if you're using the big, or if you're using a 2-speed reel with this 3-ounce lead and you're dropping the bottom, that big lead's gonna rocket that bait down the bottom past those fish that have come up off the bottom. So sometimes the bite will slow down after a while, especially when you're targeting mangrove snapper or stuff like that. They tend to come off the bottom, red snapper. So if the bite slows down, that is when I like switching to that knocker rig. And one of the most common times to use it is during the day, especially around midday, when the sun's right in the middle of the sky, the wind kind of dies down, especially in the summer. In the summertime, June, July, August, September, it's super hot, sun's right up in the sky, water's not moving, fish aren't biting. It slows down during midday. That is when I like to break out the knocker rig. That knocker rig presents the bait more naturally, and a lot of times you're going to get those non-aggressive, more leader-shy fish to want to shoot. And then typically, once you get them fired up, you can switch back to the 2-speed or your conventional setups and start catching them on the bottom again. Also, I like using my spinning rod for the hog fishing. You can use a spinning rod for the hogfish. I like using 3 different methods for the hogfish. Either using a jig head or a naked ball jig or a really light knocker rig. Hogfish are a very light or very leader-shy smart fish. So most of the time, this is a naked ball jig. And this is what I illustrate by a jig head. Just mean simply a bare jig head. And what you do with that stuff is you would tip it with a little tiny piece of shrimp. And some people like to use fiddler crabs. Some people I've even heard using sand fleas out there. But the trick to the hogfish is using the lightest lead possible. And using fluorocarbon, in my opinion, is very important. And you want to make sure that you're using a very long leader. So, like I've illustrated before, my spinning rod, I've got braid in the reel, but I have a line-to-line knot with 25, 30, 35 foot of fluorocarbon, and then I have my knocker rig set up. Typically, I'm using 4/0 hooks minimally for those hogfish, and typically it's the lightest lead possible. So if it's a flat, calm, still day, like this weekend has been, or like it is in the summertime, I'd be using the smallest weight possible. So a lot of times, that's going to be one of these really small egg sinkers that you can hardly see. The reason is you want that shrimp to just flutter to bottom naturally. And as it comes to bottom naturally, that hogfish will see it on the way down. And generally, you're going to get hit before you get to bottom if the bite's good. And what you have to do is be ready for that bite. It's very difficult. The lighter the lead you use, the harder it is to feel the bite. So there is a trade-off there. One of the tricks you can use, especially if it's flat calm, is to let your line pile up on the surface. Does anybody know what I mean by that? You're fishing inshore, you cast out with your live shrimp, you see how your line lays on the surface? You can do the same thing offshore. Pull some line off your reel, let it pile up on the surface, and you can watch it uncoil as it goes to bottom. And if you see that line jump or twitch or start running faster than it was going, that's a good indication you got the fish on. Start cranking down and set the hook. So those are the different methods you can use for the hogfish. I really enjoy using a naked ball jig as well, especially if you're covering a lot of area, you can cast out and just barely twitch your wrist and let that naked ball jig bounce along the bottom. You can tip it with shrimp or you can use it bare. Again, lightest possible works best. Jig heads I would recommend to start with the jig head. If you're going to use knocker rigs, start with the jig head. That'll give you the feel for it. It's a lot easier to start with the jig head. But once you get the hang of it, switch to a knocker rig, because when you master that, you can use that rig for mangrove snapper, red snapper, mutton snapper, gag grouper. You can use it inshore for the sheep's head. A knocker rig fishing is really good, but it's definitely an art form. When you are fishing for the hogfish, always the knocker rig I showed you is a little misleading, because this would be a knocker rig I'd be using for mangrove snapper, the double snell hook. For hogfish, I'm only using one hook. So this would be, I would cut the bottom hook off of this, and I'm always using a loop knot. A loop knot is like what I tie here on this naked ball jig. You've got, it's basically, are you familiar with the split rings on your inshore lures? You know how those lures, you'll have the little metal ring? That is what it's doing. It's basically mimicking a loop knot. It's giving that lure natural motion. If you tie a clinch knot on one of these lures or hooks, it's not allowing natural movement. Whereas this loop knot gives you a little bit of space to let that lure move a little bit more naturally in the water. So when I'm using a jig head, a naked ball jig, or I'm tying a single hook using a super light knocker rig, always using a loop knot when I'm targeting those hogfish. Anything you can do to present your bait a little bit more naturally is very important. Any more questions on that?
Test
pound test that I'm using typically for hogfish, I'm using about 20-pound braid in my reel and about 30-pound fluorocarbon. You can use 20-pound fluorocarbon, but if you haven't caught a hogfish before, even a barely legal 14 or 15-inch hogfish is going to give you some run for your money. They can fight.
Attention Bass Pro Shop customers, will Trevor Wolford and Cecil Coleman please meet their party on customer service? Trevor Wolford and Cecil Coleman, your party is waiting for you.
Perfect time to take a walk. I like using 20-pound, the lightest possible works better, but if you go too light, you're going to break off. They will rock you up. The first time, this hogfishing thing is kind of new, right? Everybody kind of new. Most of the time, 10, 15 years ago, you talk about hogfish, people would assume you're spearfishing. Nowadays, more and more people are targeting with hook and line, so it's definitely kind of a new craze. I remember about 5, 6 years ago, one of our captains, Captain Anthony, myself and my family went hog fishing, and my dad was fishing with us, and he's old school. He doesn't use spinning rods ever. And if you using a spinning rod, they'll poke fun at you a little bit. So we got him using the spinning rods, targeting the hogfish. Bam, he hooks up. It's take and drag, rocks him up. Oh, I had a nice gag on. No, that's a hogfish. No, they won't rock you up. They don't do that. They do. They'll rock you up the same way a gag will. They'll break you off the same way a gag will. They fight hard. So you definitely want to be using a reel with enough drag capacity. I like using a 4,000 or 5,000 series reel, but you got to have something that's light. Florida Fishing Products makes a great product. I like my Stratic CI14. There's a bunch of different nice reels out there, but you want to go light. That way you can have that sensitivity, but have enough drag to handle those fish. Does that answer your question? Sir? What is the law on circle hooks? Anybody work for FWC? The law on circle hooks is if you're offshore fishing in federal waters for reef species with natural bait, you must use a circle hook. So if you come out fishing with me and you rent a rod, I'm going to provide to you circle hooks because that's law. If you ask me what to use, I'm going to recommend circle hooks because that's law. Personally, on my personal rods and my personal tackle box, I personally prefer to use my personal J-hooks for anything that's going to nibble quickly, like hogfish, negro snapper, lane snapper, all those fish that come up and nibble. I personally, on my personal rods, use my personal J-hooks. But the law is you must use circle hooks while offshore fishing in federal waters using natural bait for reef species. The reason why I personally use J-hooks is because I have this. This is a D-hooker. These D-hookers come in a bunch of different kinds, colors. They sell them here at Bass Pro. With these D-hookers, it enables me to unhook a fish more quickly, no matter what kind of hook I'm using. I don't care if it's a circle hook, I don't care if it's a J-hook, it doesn't matter if it's a little baby hook, it doesn't matter if it's a 12-aught hook. This tool is going to enable me to de-hook that fish quickly. The idea behind that law was to ensure that fish were hooked in the corner of the mouth. When you're using your circle hooks, how often do the fish perfectly hook in the corner of the mouth? Just a guesstimate, guys. Come on, talk to me. Not much, right? When you're using a J-hook, it's not often in the corner of the mouth either. So to me, using a J-hook versus a circle hook doesn't give you any higher chance of hooking that fish in the corner of the mouth. So to me, personally, I know I can use this D-hooker and obey the idea behind the law, which is conservation, preserving the fishery. So I'll show you. So the idea again is to make sure no matter what you're fishing for, you can unhook that fish quickly. So the idea is the circle hook works better and it's easier to unhook. I know when I'm using my hand, not using a tool to de-hook a fish, I think it's easier to unhook the J-hook personally. But using this tool doesn't matter what you're using. So this is my hook. This is my fish. We're going to use this, or actually to be less misleading, we'll hook up this side. So this gold diamond jig is my fish. So I've got it. I've got my fish. I'm ready to unhook it. This is not a keeper fish, so I'm going to release it. So I'm going to hold it over the side of the boat, pull the trigger, and that fish is just going to fall off the hook. Doesn't matter what kind of hook I'm using, what brand of hook, circle hook, J-hook, doesn't matter. Because I'm using the right tool for the job, I'm going to be able to release that fish quickly. So again, real simple, I'll show you a little bit slower this time. If you come out fishing with us on our boats, every single deckhand or captain will have one of these in his or her possession, or else. So you run the hook of this de-hooker tool down the back of the hook. You hold the leader at a 45-degree angle away from the tool, and then all you do is squeeze the two pieces together, and it turns the hook upside down, and the fish literally falls off the hook. So that is why I personally personally, on my personal rods, use my personal J-hooks for anything that bites quickly. But the species that they made the laws for, to preserve those species that they consider overfished, those species are red grouper, gag grouper, great triggerfish, amberjack, and red snapper. And for all 5 of those species, if I was targeting them, I'd be using J-hooks, circle hooks, excuse me. And the reason why is anything that comes up and swallows the bait and runs, you should use a circle hook for. So red snapper, gag grouper, red grouper, amberjack, great triggerfish, circle hooks work fine, because they're gonna come up, swallow that bait and run. So, personally, for those mangrove snapper hogfish, I personally use a J-hook. If you come fishing with me, I gotta give you a circle hook, that's the law. Did that answer your question? It was a law. They made both of these laws. They made a law that you had to use circle hooks offshore for reef species on the bottom of federal waters using natural bait. Then they made a law that you had to have a venting tool on the boat. They made those laws like within the same month, and they repealed venting tools, but they never repealed that circle hook law. But yes, that's true. I've been boarded quite a few times. We have a lot of boats out there, and we get boarded quite often. And we have FWC on our boat. The FWC officers, every single one of them has J-hooks in their tackle box. What they do with them, I don't know, but I won't testify to that. But I've seen them use it. I've been boarded before. They don't ask to see my hooks. They don't look in my tackle box. And it is not my job to check your tackle box. I make sure there's no guns and drugs on the boat. The rest of it, whatever's in your tackle box is in your tackle box. So yes, they're not really enforcing it, and in my opinion, it's kind of bogus because the species that they're worried about, you would use a circle hook for anyway. A fisherman would use a circle hook for anyway. So there's no reason for that law in my opinion. Sir?
What size of J-hooks are you using?
For a hogfish, I like using a 4-aught hook. Whether you want to obey the law or not, that's up to you personally.
Your own tackle that we may bring on is still subject to that.
If I provide tackle to you, it will be a circle hook. So I'm a law-abiding citizen. My business is a law-abiding citizen. Any other questions? Yeah.
Best way to line tight, that's what we start with.
What he's asking is when you're setting the hook with the circle hook. Whenever you're using a circle hook, when you feel a bite, you just start cranking. Whenever you're using a J hook, you can technically set the hook, but offshore, the rule of thumb, this is my little motto that I say to make people laugh, but it's serious, is don't be a jerk, reel. When you're inshore fishing, you can set the hook all you want. They'll dance it out, rip their lips off. When you're offshore fishing in deep water, you must start cranking. So you've got to start cranking. When you feel that bite, just turn the handle. It doesn't matter if you're using circle hooks, J hooks, whatever. Start cranking. The difference is with the circle hooks, you have to wait a little bit longer, especially with these high-speed reels. If you start cranking right away, a lot of times you're going to pull the hook out of his mouth. With a J hook, it doesn't matter. As soon as you feel a bite, you can start cranking. Put the heat on. The circle hooks, you sit the hook the same way. You just start cranking. You got to let it get in the mouth. And that's why I use circle hooks for those fish that come up and swallow bait. There's a red grouper, gag grouper, amberjack, red snapper. Typically, they don't come up and nibble. Sometimes they do, especially in the summer when they're a little bit more lethargic. You'll feel them kind of come up and hit it, and then they'll grab it and run. That's what you're waiting for. So you just got to wait a little bit longer when you're using those circle hooks. But generally, those species you would use a circle hook for are just going to slam that bait. There's going to be no questions about when to set the hook, especially on a 12-hour stream.
What type of hooks do you use? Pelagic?
Pelagic, there is no law about that. When you're trolling, it would make no sense to use a circle hook. You got to use a J hook when you're trolling. When I'm flatlining, typically I'm using a circle hook, especially if I'm flatlining for tuna, cobia, those type of species. I'm using a circle hook or a billfish. I'm using a circle hook. That way when the fish comes up, he sees that natural bait, and I'm over in the corner fishing for mangroves, not paying attention. When he eats that bait and starts to run, that circle hook's going to set itself in the corner of the mouth like it does every time. So that is why I would use circle hooks for flatlining and J hooks for troll. Any other questions?
And first weekend of January, planning on scheduling a 39-hour fishing trip.
Cool.
I know you said that gag group. Now, what can I be looking for as far as what bringing in?
Well, first of all, fishing regulations is a whole other seminar on this game. I just get a little bit passionate about it, so I'll try not to beat you over the head with it too much. But in 2018, there's a few things I'm confident on. One thing is amberjack season will be May, August, September, and October. And then red grouper should be open all year with the spring deep water closure. Gag grouper should be June 1 to December 31st. Red snapper, or first of all, gray triggerfish. We're going to have our first gray triggerfish season in 4 or 5 years in federal waters. It should be in the spring, around March and April. So if you look at that, March through the end of the year, we're going to have some open. Some of those highly regulated species open the whole time. In January and February, we're going to be able to catch red grouper, mangrove snapper, plenty of other species. The porgies, the vermilions, we'll catch lane snappers, we catch scam grouper, there's tuna out there. Occasionally you still catch kingfish and it's not a real harsh winter. There's plenty of fish to be caught all year round. We have been starting to see some mutton and snapper up this far north, which is unique, which is a good sign. They're kind of spreading out a little bit. But the best way to stay up to date on fishery regulations is using our website, hogfish.com, click info and fishing rights. There's a link there to the Gulf Council's app. You can put it on your phone. Before you check it, just hit settings, update regulations, and every time they release any changes, put on that app within seconds of the announcement. As long as you go into settings and update regulations before you check. So that's what I personally use to go check the regulations before I go fishing. But there's plenty of fish out there to be caught. Any other questions? So we'll get into a little bit about gag grouper. I don't know how much time we got left. Yeah, we got a little bit of time. One last thing about hogfish is they're very leader shy and unaggressive. So you kind of got to fish down the area. Typically when you anchor up on a spot, you start catching fish, everybody's catching fish, then it gets to that point where it kind of slows down and everybody's like, man, we're not really catching much now. And then it gets to a point where it's like, all right, we gotta go. Nobody's catching nothing. That is when you start targeting the hogfish. They're gonna be the last fish to bite, and typically they're a lot like trout. Once you hook one, you'll catch quite a few more. And then all of a sudden it'll shut off. And then it's time to move and start that whole process over again. So you can either, what we do on the party boat is we'll get anchored up over a spot. Everybody drops shrimp, or squid. No one's allowed to use shrimp. Everybody drops squid, use the normal conventional setups, catch a bunch of those gray snapper, porgies, sea bass, more aggressive fish. Kind of clear them out a little bit. Either throw them in the fish box or just crank them to the surface, unhook them and toss them back. That's going to stop them from chewing. Then once you get to the point where they stop feeding as much, then we can start targeting hogfish with the shrimp and the lighter tackle. Or if you're in a personal boat, you don't have 20 of your closest friends helping you fish down that area, you can always chum. I like using aquatic nutrition. I think it's aquatic nutrition sport fishing chums. They make a super shrimps. Yes, it is shrimps. It's not super shrimp, it's super shrimps. They make a product, it's like a pellet that sinks to the bottom really fast, so you can drop that off the boat, just a little bit uptide, and that's going to hit the bottom pretty quickly, and that'll help kind of chum the area up, feed those other fish. You get the smell of shrimp going in the water. Also for hogfish, you want to use fresh shrimp, either live shrimp or fresh dead shrimp. If it turns pink at all, it will not work as well, in my opinion. So fresh shrimp is the key. You don't have to use a big shrimp, and that's a common misconception. If you start using shrimp like this, you got no shot at catching a hog. You're gonna catch a juvenile red grouper and frustrate the heck out of yourself. You want to find shrimp that are a little bit smaller. And if you can't find one that's small enough, I always like to just tear the head off of it, and you can even tear the tail off of it to make you a smaller piece of bait that's going to be less likely to be grabbed up by those red grouper. And then for the jig heads, when you're using a jig head, a lot of times what I'll do with this guy is you rig them the same way you would inshore. When you're inshore fishing, you rig up a plastic worm on your jig head. You can rig it up the same way. That way it's going to go to the bottom. It's going to look real natural, and it'll skip along the bottom just like your lure would. It's inshore if you were red fishing using a soft plastic on your jig head. Okay? For the naked ball jigs, I just put a little tiny chunk of shrimp, just enough to get some smell in the water on the larger of the hooks. And for the knocker rig, with the single hook, not the double hook, I'll typically hook the shrimp. I'm going to use a big shrimp just so you can see it easier. But again, remember, I would be using a smaller shrimp. I would hook underneath the tail, not the top. And again, this is a larger hook and a larger shrimp just so you can see it better. But I'd be personally using a 4-aught hook and a smaller shrimp. But that's how I would rig them for the knocker rig. Because as the knocker rig goes to the bottom, that egg sinker is going to float further and further from that shrimp. And this shrimp is going to be struggling to the surface as he's pulled down backwards. And as he's struggling to the surface, he's slowing his descent even more. So if you're using a light lead and you have that shrimp hook like this, he's going to descend to the bottom very slowly. And it's going to be very appetizing to that hogfish, or the mangrove snapper, or whatever else is swimming by. All right, gag grouper. That's what you guys came for, right? That's what I like fishing for. Gag, in my opinion, gag grouper, mangrove snapper are my two favorite species to target. Mangrove snapper are very quick biting. They're very smart. If you can catch a lot of mangrove snapper very consistently, you're a really good angler. That sets people apart. A lot of times on a party boat, you get the guy, he knows it all. That's great, man. Good luck out there. I won't bother you. Then you'll see him catch 1 or 2 mangroves to the guy next to him's 20 mangroves. That's a good sign. I mean, I know it all. But just takes a little bit of practice. The mangrove snapper, the trick to using those is the double snell rig. You will catch 50% more mangrove snapper if you're using the double snell rig. Let me show you real quickly. The double snell rig is really simple. I'll pass these around so you guys can see them. Just kind of pass them down the rows. The double snell rig is really easy to tie. You can tie it very quickly, very easily, and you can do 1 hook, 2 hooks, 3 hooks, however you want to snell them. I personally like using 2 and that's it. The idea behind the double snell hook is when you have your thread fin, when you're fishing for mangrove snapper, typically you're using a thread fin or a sardine. And the first step to mangrove snapper fishing is to cut that tail off so it doesn't spin on the way to bottom. So you start with your tail cut. Then for mangrove snapper, I personally like cutting the head off. So I open up the body cavity there. And then when I'm using thread fins, I will trim this belly section out too to further open up the belly cavity and make me a little strip of sardine. That way, it's really nice and hydrodynamic as it goes to the bottom. The belly cavity is completely open, allowing plenty of oils to get out in the water. And when I hook that double snell rig into this bait, there's nowhere for that mangrove snapper to bite that he's not going to get one of my hooks in his mouth. That is why I cut my bait like this for mangroves. Works really well. Even inshore, for those of you guys who like fishing on the skyway for mangrove snapper, pick up some sardines, cut them up like that, and try some double snell rig fishing. You'll see with a light knocker rig, you'll see very quickly how much more successful that double snell rig will make you. Also a little bit of chum when you're fishing shallow waters. The aquatic nutrition sport fishing chums makes what's called snapper up. drop some of that up tide of where you're fishing, you probably get plenty of mangroves on the skyway. Easy trick to that when you're fishing inshore. If you're fishing the flats or you're fishing a bridge and you want to get your chum up tide from where you are, so that way it's hitting the bottom where you're fishing, not 20, 30 feet behind you. A trick that I like using is you take a wiffle ball bat, take your kid's bat, take it in the garage and cut it. You cut it at a little bit of an angle, so that way the bat is hollow, you can fill it with chum, and then you just sling it out there, and that chum will sling out up high. So that way by the time it hits the bottom, it's right below you. Instead of dropping it at your feet, and it's hitting the bottom on the other side of the bridge, pulling fish away from you. Just a little bit. Any questions on mangrove snapper? No. Offshore, typically 5-6 odd hooks, 40-50 pound test for the mangroves. So this is my gag grouper setup. Gag grouper, I like using a minimum 80 pound test for gags. Minimum of 80 pound test for gag grouper. If they're biting well and everybody's catching them, I'll use a 100 pound test. And if you start breaking off, if you're still biting well, 125 pound test. One of my favorite stories that I like to tell, most of you probably heard it before, is the story of Big Head Ed and his I think it was over 40 pounds. It was a big gag, one of the biggest gags I've ever seen caught. He was using a 9-aught reel just like this. He was using 80 pound main line with a 100 pound leader and a little 7-aught hook. Dropped a big bait, got hit, got rocked up, broke off. Went and got a 125 pound leader, 10-aught hook, big bait, dropped down, same fish, very quickly hit it, rocked him up, broke him off. He went up and got his 80 wide, 2-speed international with a 125 pound test and a 150 pound leader and a 12-aught hook, another really big piece of bait, and finally caught that fish, landed it. And it had his other 2 or 3 leaders hanging out of its mouth. So those fish, when they're feeding well, they will keep hitting those baits. And if you're breaking fish off and letting them get rocked up, you're shutting down the bite for everybody else. Because when they get a hook in their mouth and they fight and they get into their holes, what the gags do is they flare out their gills and they'll turn their tail. A lot of times you'll see it on the cutting table if you cut a fresh, on the measuring stick. When you go to measure a gag, you'll see him flare his gills and kind of kick his tail out, and you won't want to go straight. That's what they do with a rock hole. And that's why it's hard to pull them out of their hole. Because they've got their tail bent, they've got their gills flared, and they're in there grunting. They're making this real low grunt noise. And that grunt noise is really low, and it's going to pass over the whole ledge or red. It's going to let all the fish know that there's something going on. And it kind of shuts down the bite. So it's very important you're making sure you're getting all these fish quickly and you don't get rocked up. Trick with that is as soon as you feel those fish start going and he slams your bite, starts running, you gotta get cranks on that fish. I like to crank down and then lift up, crank down and then lift up. It's called the grouper dance. Just quick movements. You're only lifting up a couple inches and then you're reeling down as much as you can. You lift it up and you go really quick, really aggressively until you got that fish up off the bottom. Once he's up off the bottom, slow down. Even back to drag off a little bit. If he starts running, give him a little bit of line. Point that rod tip out a little bit. Once you've got him up off the bottom, your line is stressed, that hook is ready to break, your knots are stressed, the fish has a nice big hole in his mouth. Once you're up off the bottom, it's a lot of times you can lose fish, even once you're clear of the bottom, just by trying to pump them too much. When you're pumping them, if you drop the rod without cranking down, you give him a little bit of slack, he's able to spit that hook. So you gotta be careful. Once you get them off the bottom, go easy, slow down, finesse it. That is the biggest trick. Also, making sure you're using big tackle. Big tackle, big bait, big patience. That's how you're gonna get a big gag. Because a gag grouper isn't gonna come up and slam that bait most of the time. A lot of times you get the aggressive gags when you first drop down on a spot, you'll get that 1 or 2 aggressive gags to hit it. But typically a gag, once you hit bottom, you gotta make sure your leader's nice and straight. You gotta make sure that you're doing everything right. You're holding bottom, you're moving with the boat. You're not letting that lead bounce up and down the bottom, you know what I mean? You can't sit out there, hold the rod, drink a beer, and talk to your buddy. You gotta sit there and you gotta move with the boat. The boat's going down, my rod tip's going up. The boat's going down, boat's going up, my rod tip's going down. You're constantly keeping that lead tight enough to feel the bait, but not tight enough to move that lead off the bottom. Because, I'm gonna go over here. Oh, caught myself a spinning rod. Because if you're sitting there holding the rod steady, drinking a beer, talking to your buddy, and the boat's going up and down, this is what your lead's doing on the bottom. No gag grouper's going to get close to that. Even if it moves just a little bit, it's going to create a puff of sand, and no gag grouper's going to get close to that. So you've got to be focused. I like to keep my thumb and forefinger on the line. I like to kind of stay with my legs bent, leaned up against the rail, and I'm constantly moving my rod tip with the boat. Constantly moving my rod tip with the boat. It doesn't matter if I'm going up or going down, that lead's hardly moving because I'm moving with the boat. Very important to stay on top of that. Make sure you present that bait naturally. Also, a lot of times when you drop down, if you drop down, your lead's going to go right on top of your hook in a lot of cases. So when you initially drop down, what I like to do, my dad literally counts. It's kind of annoying to fish next to him, because you'll hear him count all the time. He'll drop down, and what he'll do is he'll count to 60 seconds. If he doesn't get a bite, he'll lift his rod tip real slowly all the way to the sky, and then he'll drop his rod tip down back to the bottom real slowly again. And what you guys in the front, what did that do? It stretched that leader out. When you lift your rod tip real slowly to the sky and drop it back down real slowly, the tide and the current is going to stretch that lead out for you, or the swing of the boat, or the drift, whatever you're doing. That hook is going to get stretched out further away from that lead on the bottom, and it's going to look more natural, instead of when you first drop down, it all being in one big hump on the bottom. So drop down, wait a few seconds. If you don't get slammed, lift the rod tip up, drop it back down to the bottom slowly. This will give you more chances at any fish, but especially gags. It's going to give you a more natural presentation. Bigger bait is better. Hooking, let's see how much time we have. We got a little bit of time. Hooking the bait. When I'm bottom fishing at anchor, I like hooking my bait up underneath the chin. When I'm bottom fishing at anchor, there's a few different ways to hook the bait. You can hook it up underneath the chin, out the mouth, and what this does is this allows you to get that bait down the bottom quickly, because it's going to be hydrodynamic. As that lead pulls it down, it's going to be going straight down. It's going to go to the bottom quickly. You'll be able to get down there quickly if that one big aggressive gag is ready to chew. You're going to be the first one down. He's going to be able to come up there and slam. If you're drift fishing, you've got to hook it like this. Because that way, as you drift along, that hook tip is up away from the bottom, and that bait is being dragged along the bottom naturally. If you're fishing a bridge for snook in the current, this is also the way you hook your bait. That way it can swim naturally in the current. When you're bottom fishing at anchor, typically I like to hook my bait this way. The reason why is once it gets to the bottom and that lead, the leader's all stretched out and it looks natural, this fish, because the hook is in the back quarter of the fish, typically it kind of weights in like this. So typically, you'll see them fluttering off the bottom, trying to pull away from that lead. That kind of struggle is what's going to bring the dinner bell for those gags. But when you hook it like this, the downside is, as you drop it to bottom, he's spinning, helicoptering, and it's dragging him down backwards, drowning him. So you've got to go a little bit slower. When you're going to bottom, you just thumb your spool a little bit. Every now and again, you stop it, let that lead. How many times have you been dropping down and you put your thumb on the spool and all of a sudden after a second or two you'll feel the thud of that lead hitting the spool? You know what I'm talking about? That is because your bait's spinning and creating drag in the water, and that lead's getting further from that swivel. You want to make sure your lead is right on your swivel as it goes to bottom. That way when it does hit bottom, your lead is not way away from your bait and you've got all this tangled mess down there. You want to present your bait naturally. Every now and again, just press your thumb to the spool, or once you get down to the bottom, as you lift your rod tip up slowly after a few seconds, if you lift your rod tip to the sky and you still haven't picked up your lead yet, that's a good indication that your hook or your swivel is really far away from your lead. So you lift your rod tip up to the sky, reel in some slack until you feel the weight of that lead, and then lower your rod tip, reel up the slack, and then lift your rod tip up. That's going to be what straightens out your leader. Follow me? Any questions before we stop?
One, when you're at anchor,
Yeah.
and you're talking about keeping your lead on the bottom, and you're following that, but it seems like from my experience is that you have to try to keep letting more line out as the drift or the boat movement. And when you feel it not on the bottom anymore, or it's not, is that something you could address? Or?
Typically, when you're fishing for gag grouper, if your lead is at flat still on the bottom, you will not catch those gags. You won't catch the more smart, bigger gags. So when you anchor, especially on a bigger boat like a party boat, you have a lot of scope out and the boat will swing. So that's what you're talking about. As the boat swings, occasionally, if you don't either give it some slack or lift your rod tip up and reset it, it will drag your bait off the bottom. And that is what you got to combat by. I like what I do when I'm drift fishing or when we're swinging real bad due to a little bit of wind or opposing currents. What I like to do is because I'm tall, it helps a little bit. Might be a little bit difficult if you're not as tall, but I like to keep my rod tip up real high in the sky. The reason for that is as we drift away from my bait, all I have to do is as I drift away, I'm going to move like my boat's drifting away. As I drift away, all I have to do is lower my rod tip. Then once I drift away or swing away so far where my rod tip's down and I feel my lead's going to move, I can just simply pull the free spool, let my line back out until I'm nice and high in the sky again. That way, as the boat moves, all I'm doing is slowly lowering my rod tip, and that lead's never disturbing the sand on the bottom, spooking those gags. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Any other questions, guys?
I do a lot of inshore fishing. What's a good time to use that lure right there?
What lure? These lures? Oh, the gotcha plugs? All right now. Gotcha plugs are really cool lures because they catch a lot of different species. My favorite application for these lures is mackerel. And mackerel are in the spring and summer. For the most part, it's when you get the majority, or excuse me, spring and fall, I apologize. Spring and fall is when you get the majority of the mackerel in the area, but they do stay around the area all summer. Right now, we're kind of at the tail end of mackerel being real prominent in the area, but there's still plenty of mackerel being caught around the skyway, around bridges, along the beaches. Anywhere that holds bait, you can use those gotcha plugs. The thing about mackerel is they like a fast retrieve, so you cast it out as far as you can, let it sink for a few seconds, and then start cranking it at a pretty good clip. Faster than you would work any other lure. And then as you're reeling in, every now and again, I'll pause for a second and then start cranking again. And that'll let that lure stay deeper in the water. Because if you start just cranking really fast, you'll eventually get it skipping on the surface and that doesn't work as well. So every now and again, just pause for a second, let it sink again. But to answer your question, you can fish a gotcha plug at the Skyway all year round and catch mackerel. But the most mackerel is there in spring and fall. When the water temperature is right, that's when the kingfish and mackerel make their migrations. In the summertime, they come up into the Gulf, the Northern Gulf, and then in the wintertime, they're heading into the Caribbean. They like water temperatures around 73 to about 77, 78 degrees. Anything outside of that range, they're going to be moving. So So that's, does that answer your question? I'll get to you next, buddy.
Talking about the lead being right on the bottom.
Yep.
The species where you want the lead being frank there.
I hear that a lot, and his question is talk about the lead being right on the bottom. Is there any other species that you want the lead off the bottom? In my opinion, no, never. The only time the lead would be off the bottom is if I'm using my knocker rig and I'm letting that bait go to the bottom slowly and I'm getting hit before I get to the bottom. Personally, I'm no fish, but I try to think like a fish. Personally, if this big 3-ounce lead is moving in the water column, bouncing around, there's no way a quality fish is going to come up and hit it. Because if you're not on the bottom, there's no way to keep this lead still. It's going to be moving up and down with the boat. And as it moves up and down, it's going to make your bait move up and down. You can catch plenty of fish up off the bottom. If you're on a half-day trip fishing for gray snapper or runts, or you're offshore fishing for porgies or vermilions or red snapper, because there's a million of them out there, it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to catch some of those fish you can chew. So yes, you can catch fish by cranking 1 or 2 cranks off the bottom. Would I recommend it? No. I like to stay flat on the bottom, present my bait naturally, be a little bit more patient, and generally you're going to catch a higher quality, more leader-shy fish. If you're bottom fishing, in my opinion, you should be on the bottom. Flat on the bottom, sitting still, leader stretched out, present that bait as naturally as possible, no matter what bait you're using. But there are some situations like knocker rigging or vertical jigging where you're not fishing flat on the bottom. But if you're using natural bait, dead bait, live bait, cut bait, on the bottom, lead still, in my opinion. What was your question back there? Red grouper. Red grouper, typically you're drifting for red grouper. This time of year we're anchor fishing primarily because of the gags. We're targeting these gags. You can still catch red grouper while you're anchor fishing, but in the summertime, I like to drift large areas of hard rock bottom for red grouper. Typically red grouper, I like using long strips of cut squid wings for, because red grouper love octopus tentacles, or octopus. It's one of their favorite food. So a long strip of cut squid mimics that octopus tentacle, and if you get 5, 6, 7, or 30 people using those squid strips, as the boat drifts over an area of hard rock bottom, that red grouper's looking up, freaking out, seeing this octopus will move by, and they get real excited. But you can use a pinfish hooked up underneath the jaw, out the top of the face, when you're drifting for red grouper as well. You can use cut thread fins. But personally, I personally prefer that long strip of squid. It's my favorite go-to red grouper bait. Now red grouper, you can use that double snell hook rig for. I'll do like a 7-ounce circle hook on the bottom, a 60-pound test, and I'll put like a 4-aught hook a little bit, maybe 2 to 3 inches above it. That way I have that big circle hook right in the middle of that squid strip, and up towards the top of that squid strip, I'll have that little baby hook. So a lot of times we'll have porgies or gray snappers or vermilions or lanes come hit that squid strip, and that little baby hook up towards the top gives me a fighting chance at hooking this fish. Any other questions, or we'll wrap up? Guys, thank you all for coming. Don't forget, you can check us out at hubbardsmarina.com. I have plenty of brochures up here. I have my cards up here if you want to come grab one. We also have some cards for Cleanse Oil. Cleanse Oil makes a really cool product. It's one of the best cleaners, lubricants, and protectants on the market. I use it exclusively on my reels, rods, boat motors, engine compartments. I use it at home on my grill, my sliding glass door, anything and everything. I put it on my cereal box. But they also make a product for your guns. Instead of having to clean your gun, lubricate your gun, and then put the red oil on to protect it, one oil, one process, very quick. Highly recommended. Come grab a card on that. Last thing, don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Just simply look up Hubbard's Marina. I personally run our online social media, so if you ever have any more questions, if you're coming fishing with us and you want to know what's the best day to come, if you want me to check the weather for you, pick you out a day to come, don't hesitate to message us over the Hubbard's Marina Facebook page. or contact me personally on Facebook. I think that's about it. Don't forget to check us out on our website, grab a brochure before you leave. Last but not least, those of you